The Vanishing Hitchhiker on Route 89. I was driving alone through northern Arizona on old Route 89, a stretch of highway that most locals avoid after dark. It was late autumn, November of 2017, a little after 1:20 a.m. I was hauling a half-empty trailer back toward Flagstaff after a long delivery run. The night was cold, the air thin, and the desert around me looked like a flat black ocean without a single light for miles. I'd driven this road many times, but that night the silence felt heavier than usual, as if the whole desert were holding its breath. I remember thinking how strange it felt not to hear the usual distant hum of other trucks. I was completely alone out there. About 20 miles south of Page, where the road bends slightly and drops into a long dip, I noticed a shape on the shoulder up ahead. At first I thought it was debris or a broken-down car, but as my headlights swept closer, the shape stood up. It was a girl. Young. Skinny. Maybe 19 or 20. She was wearing a dark blue hoodie, jeans, and she stood with her arms wrapped around herself like she was freezing. Her hair was long and dark, blown sideways by the cold desert wind. She wasn't waving, wasn't walking, just standing perfectly still, facing the road. I slowed down because leaving someone out there alone felt wrong, no matter the hour. But something about her posture made my stomach tighten. She didn't look startled or relieved to see me. She wasn't shivering. She was just waiting. When I pulled up beside her, she stepped toward the passenger door without hesitation. I rolled down the window halfway and asked if she needed help. She didn't answer. She just looked at me with this distant, absent expression, like she wasn't fully aware of where she was. I reached over, unlocked the door, and she climbed in quickly, sitting stiffly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The cab light caught her face for a second, and I saw how pale she was. Not sick pale. More like sun-bleached stone. Her skin looked wrong somehow, as if there was no warmth under it. I asked if she was in trouble, if she needed to call anyone, if she'd been stranded. She didn't respond to any of it. She just stared out the windshield, breathing shallowly. Her chest rose and fell like someone who hadn't spoken in a long, long time. The only thing she did was pull the seatbelt across herself in this slow, rigid movement. I kept driving, telling myself she was in shock or scared. People behave strangely in the desert at night. Isolation messes with your mind. After about 5 minutes I tried again. "Do you live nearby?" I asked. "Where were you heading?" Her eyes drifted toward me, but she still didn't speak. She opened her mouth just slightly, as if she was trying to form a word, but no sound came out. Then she turned back to the window. I noticed then that her clothes didn't look dirty, just worn out, faded, like they'd been washed too many times. The hoodie had a small embroidered patch on the sleeve, a white crescent moon and the letters PHS. My first thought was Page High School. The temperature in the cab dropped. Not a little. A sudden, deep cold, like someone had opened a freezer. My windshield began to fog from the inside. I checked the controls, thinking the AC malfunctioned, but everything was off. I rubbed the glass with the back of my hand, looked at her again, and that's when I noticed something that froze me completely. She wasn't breathing anymore. Her chest wasn't moving at all. She sat perfectly still, hands in her lap, eyes forward, like a statue carved out of frost. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, that her breathing was too shallow to see, but my gut knew that wasn't true. Something was deeply wrong. My fingers trembled slightly against the steering wheel. I managed to ask quietly, "Are you okay?" No answer. I drove faster, desperate to reach a lit stretch of road or a gas station, but there was nothing around. Just desert and darkness and the endless stretch of Route 89. The cab felt smaller by the second. Every part of me screamed that I needed to drop her off, but abandoning her out here felt impossible. Not humane. Then it happened. I glanced in the side mirror for a second to check if any cars were behind me. When I looked back at the passenger seat, she was gone. Not stepping out. Not opening the door. Not fading. She was just gone. The seatbelt lay across the seat, hooked into the latch exactly the way she had buckled it. The indentation of her body was still in the fabric. The temperature in the cab shot back up instantly, like someone had exhaled warm air through the vents. I slammed the brakes. Tires screeched against the asphalt. I jumped out, flashlight in hand, shouting into the darkness. There was nobody. No footprints. No signs of someone stepping out. No door slam, no shift in the truck, nothing. It was like she had evaporated into the air. I sat in the truck for a long time after that, trying to steady my breathing. I kept telling myself it had to be exhaustion or a hallucination caused by lack of sleep. But in my chest I knew that wasn't true. The temperature drop, the silence, the way she looked, the way she vanished, none of that matched anything human. When I finally reached Flagstaff, the first thing I did was stop at a diner that stayed open all night. My hands were still shaking slightly as I wrapped them around a cup of coffee. A couple of older locals sat near the counter. They noticed I looked rattled and asked if I was okay. After hesitating, I told them the whole story. Both men froze. One leaned forward and said quietly, "You saw her too." The other nodded slowly and told me that a girl from Page High School died on that stretch of Route 89 20 years ago. She had been standing on the shoulder after a car accident. A truck came around a bend too fast to stop. Drivers who passed that area late at night had reported seeing a girl matching her description. Silent. Pale. Wearing the same hoodie. Sometimes she appeared walking along the shoulder. Sometimes sitting. Sometimes standing exactly where her body was found. One of the men added, "If she gets into your vehicle, she stays silent. Doesn't speak. Doesn't blink. Then she's gone. Just like that." I didn't sleep that day. Or the next night. A week later, when I drove that same route again out of necessity, I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, hands locked on the wheel. But the feeling never left. That bone-deep sense that the desert was watching me. That if I slowed down, if I so much as glanced at the shoulder, I'd see her again. The end. The old man in the reflective jacket, mile 213. I was driving through eastern Nevada on the remote stretch of Highway 50, the one everyone calls the loneliest road in America. It was early January of 2019, around 3:40 in the morning, long before sunrise. The desert around me was frozen and empty, silent in a way that didn't feel natural. I'd driven this highway dozens of times hauling parts between Ely and Fallon, but that night the road felt different from the moment I merged onto it. The fog was unusually thick, low to the ground, and the visibility was so poor that I barely saw past my own headlights. Clouds hung heavy and unmoving above the dark desert, like they were pressing down on the world. My only company was the faint hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the CB radio. I was alone in the truck that night. My partner, a guy named Harrison, had called out sick, leaving me to cover the overnight haul by myself. Normally I preferred company on overnight runs, but I told myself I could manage. I had coffee, good weather reports, and enough experience with these roads to feel confident. But around mile marker 213, something changed. The fog seemed to thicken all at once, as if I had driven into a wall. It was so dense that the high beams reflected back at me, turning the glass into a glowing white curtain. That was when I first saw him. A faint shape appeared in my headlights, standing on the right shoulder of the highway. At first I thought it was a stranded driver or someone whose car had broken down. My instinct was to slow down, but even as I eased off the gas I could tell something was off. The figure didn't move. Not even a shift of weight. As I got closer, I saw that it was a man wearing a reflective roadworker's jacket, the kind with neon orange stripes and glass bead reflective tape. The jacket glowed unnaturally bright in my lights. His head was down, chin almost touching his chest, and his arms hung at his sides. I slowed the truck to about 15 miles per hour as I passed him. I waited for him to look up, wave, do anything a normal person would do when a vehicle approached. But he didn't move. He didn't react at all. I couldn't see his face. Just the top of an old, faded hard hat and the reflective tape burning white in the beam of my headlights. Then, as I crept past him, something happened that I still can't fully explain. He turned. Not quickly. Not naturally. His head lifted with a kind of stiff, dragging motion, like someone pulling on rusted hinges. And when his face caught the edge of my headlights, it was blank. Not faceless, not empty. Just wrong. His skin had this washed-out gray tone, and his eyes reflected the light in a way I had never seen before. Not like the eyeshine of an animal. More like glass. Cold. Still. Dead. I didn't stop. I didn't even think about stopping. Instinct kicked in, and I accelerated as fast as I could. My pulse hammered in my neck. I told myself he was just a worker pulling a graveyard shift, maybe tired, maybe injured. But his face didn't look tired. It looked like it didn't belong to a living person. I checked the mirrors repeatedly as I drove. For nearly half a mile I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see him walking into the lane or waving at me to stop. But the fog swallowed everything behind me. The emptiness looked even worse than seeing him standing there. About 10 miles later, the radio crackled alive with static. I turned the volume down, thinking it was interference, but through the static I swore I heard a faint voice. A man's voice. Muffled. Slow. Almost like breathing with syllables. I turned the knob, trying to clear it up, but the voice vanished. Just more static. I forced myself to breathe normally, telling myself exhaustion and fog were messing with my head. And then, at mile 213 again, I saw him. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. But no. There he was. The same man in the reflective jacket, the same posture, the same motionless stance, standing on the side of the road directly beside the mile marker. The exact same position as before. My blood went ice cold. There was no turnoff. No side road. No way he could have reached that spot before me, especially not on foot. I had driven a very long stretch without stopping, without slowing. There was no explanation. I passed him again. And again, the moment I approached, he lifted his head in that slow, mechanical movement. His eyes caught the light, and I felt the sharp, instinctive jolt of fear deep in my chest. No living person should look the way he did. His face was ashen, the reflective tape on his jacket gleaming harshly like a warning. I slammed the gas pedal down so hard the engine growled. I flew past him and didn't look back. My hands were shaking on the wheel. My mouth had gone dry. Something inside me screamed that I was not alone on that road. Not really. Something was following me, something that had no business being there. Almost 20 minutes passed without seeing anything unusual. I kept repeating to myself that once the fog lifted, everything would be fine. It was just a trick of the light, or someone playing a cruel joke. But at mile marker 214, I saw him again. This time not on the shoulder. He was in the middle of the lane. I swerved so violently that my whole rig jerked sideways. The trailer rumbled and skidded, and for a moment I thought I might roll the entire truck. The fog blew apart in the turbulence for a second, revealing the figure clearly. He stood straight, arms at his sides, reflective jacket glowing. But there was something worse now, something far more terrifying than before. He was facing me. Directly. Head lifted. Staring straight into the windshield with those unnatural, glass-like eyes. He didn't flinch when the truck barreled toward him. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't react at all. He just watched. And then, 1 second before the front bumper should have hit him, he disappeared. Not stepped away. Not fell. He vanished. The space where he stood was completely empty. I didn't stop driving. I didn't even breathe for a few seconds. I kept going, hands numb, vision blurry from adrenaline. My entire body felt locked in fear. When I finally reached Fallon at dawn, I went straight to the gas station where the local drivers usually met before shifting routes. A few old-timers were already sitting inside, drinking coffee. One of them, a man named Lenny, noticed how pale I looked and asked what happened. I told him everything. Every detail. The fog. The reflective jacket. The way he kept appearing miles ahead of me. The way he vanished. The moment I finished, the room went silent. Lenny leaned back slowly and said, "You saw the worker." Another man nodded, looking down at his cup. "Happened 10 years ago. Foggy night just like what you described. Road crew was working near 213. A driver didn't see one of the workers and hit him head-on. Killed him instantly. The reflective jacket was all they found still intact. Body was a mess." A third driver added softly, "People see him sometimes. Only in heavy fog. Sometimes standing on the shoulder. Sometimes in the road. Always at 213 or close. If he looks at you, it means you drove the same pattern that killed him." He paused before saying the next part. "And if he stands in your lane, that means he remembers the moment of impact. And he wants you to see it too." I didn't sleep for nearly 40 hours after that. That stretch of road still makes my skin crawl. I will never drive mile 213 in fog again. And every time I pass that marker in clear weather, I feel the urge to look away from the shoulder. Because somewhere in the fog, whether you see him or not, he's still standing there, waiting for someone who looks just like the driver who took his life. The end. Screams from the abandoned bridge. I was driving through rural West Virginia on the old county roads that wind through the foothills near Fayette County. The area is full of forgotten mining towns, collapsed barns, and stretches of forest so thick they swallow sound. It happened in late October of 2020, around 11:50 p.m. I wasn't alone that night. My girlfriend at the time, Lauren, was riding with me. We had spent the evening visiting her relatives near Beckley, and we were heading back toward Summersville. The GPS had taken us onto one of those narrow, unlit roads that barely fit 2 cars. The sky was moonless, and the mist coming off the river made everything look darker than it should have. As we drove deeper into the woods, the fog thickened like a slow-moving wall. The headlights illuminated only a few feet ahead of us, and the trees on both sides curled inward over the road, their branches scraping lightly against each other. We were in that part of the state where cell reception dies completely, and any house you pass looks abandoned. Even the night insects were quiet. It felt like the woods were waiting for something. About 15 minutes after we left the last intersection, we reached an old metal truss bridge. I had never driven it before, but Lauren recognized it immediately. She stiffened in her seat and asked if we could turn around. When I asked why, she said her uncle had told her stories about this bridge, stories about a child screaming in the night, stories locals avoided talking about. But the road was too narrow to turn around safely, so we had no choice but to cross it. The bridge looked half-rotted. Rusted beams, broken lights, planks patched with mismatched boards. Beneath it, the river was slow but loud, its sound echoing up through the steel frame. The entire structure groaned with every small gust of wind. As we approached, I slowed down to maybe 5 miles per hour so we wouldn't shake the bridge more than necessary. Halfway across, the first scream came. It wasn't loud. Not at first. More like a faint wail carried on the wind, drifting upward from somewhere below the bridge. Lauren grabbed my arm immediately, nails digging into my jacket. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, maybe a fox or a coyote, but the sound wasn't right. It wasn't wild. It wasn't distorted. It was human. And it was the scream of a child. I rolled down my window a couple of inches despite Lauren grabbing at my hand. The cold air rushed in, carrying a smell of damp leaves and river water. The scream came again, clearer, sharper, unmistakably coming from under the bridge. And this time, it wasn't just a scream. There was a voice. "Help me." It was thin, trembling, desperate. A small voice. A young boy's voice. My mouth went dry instantly. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I leaned forward instinctively, trying to listen harder. The wind had stopped completely, which made the voice echo louder under the steel beams. "Help me." Lauren begged me to keep driving, but my instincts pushed me to stop. Leaving a child beneath an old, unstable bridge felt unthinkable. I parked the truck right in the center of the bridge, turned on the hazard lights, and stepped out with my flashlight. The moment my boots hit the metal grating, the echo of the river got louder, harsher, like the sound was being punched upward through hollow steel. When I walked to the side rail and pointed my flashlight downward, the beam barely touched the water. The fog was too thick, rolling in heavy sheets below us. I called out, asking who was down there, asking if they were hurt. The metal frame around me groaned again, almost like a long, pained breath. For a moment there was nothing. Then something moved directly under my feet. A scraping noise. A shuffle. Something brushing against the metal support beams. And then the voice again, this time right below where I stood. "Please, help." The voice wasn't echoing from the river anymore. It was rising straight up from beneath the planks of the bridge. I felt Lauren's hand on my back, trembling. She begged me to get back in the truck. But I couldn't shake the image of a child clinging to the lower beams, trying not to fall into the river. My flashlight couldn't penetrate the fog under the bridge, but I could hear movement. Small, slow, dragging movement. I leaned further over the railing, calling out again. That was when something tapped the underside of the bridge. Just one tap. Then another. Then a slow dragging scrape that traveled along the metal directly under my feet, moving toward the opposite end of the bridge. It sounded like someone, or something, was crawling underneath the walkway, scraping their hands or feet along the rusted beams. Lauren screamed for me to come back. I stepped away from the railing, suddenly aware that my entire body was shaking. I heard the scraping noise again, this time sharper, like nails dragging across metal. And then the voice returned, but it was different. "Help me, please." The words were the same, but the tone wasn't. It was deeper now. Slower. Too controlled. Too calm. It didn't sound like a child anymore. It sounded like something pretending to be one. I froze in place. The river roared louder beneath us, but even through the noise I could hear the crawling sound getting closer again. And then a long, thin shadow appeared under the fog, right where the beams connected. It was stretched and distorted, but unmistakably shaped like a person hanging underneath the bridge, clinging to the metal. I didn't check again. I grabbed Lauren's hand and practically shoved her into the passenger seat. I ran around the front of the truck, jumped in, and floored the gas pedal. The truck shuddered violently as we crossed the remaining length of the bridge. The scraping sound followed us, dragging harshly beneath the metal grates, staying right under the truck's center. Only when the asphalt finally replaced the steel did the noise stop instantly, like a switch had been flipped. The fog behind us seemed to collapse in on the bridge, swallowing it whole. I kept driving until we reached a small clearing near a service station a few miles down the road. I didn't speak. Neither did Lauren. It felt like if we opened our mouths, something would crawl out of the silence behind us and follow us into the light. The next morning I returned to the area with one of the local deputies that Lauren's uncle knew. The fog had lifted. The daylight made the bridge look even worse. Corroded beams, broken welds, chunks of steel flaking off. Beneath the bridge, the lower supports were half submerged in the river. The deputy walked the perimeter with me, shining his flashlight into the dark spaces under the structure. There was nothing there. No footprints. No debris. No clothing. Nothing that looked remotely human. The underside of the bridge was empty. But as we were about to leave, the deputy stopped abruptly. He knelt down near one of the main vertical beams and brushed away some dirt and rust with his thumb. Something carved into the metal caught the light. 3 small letters. JT. Next to it, carved deeper and cleaner than the rest, was a date. 1987. I asked the deputy if he knew anything about it. He nodded slowly and said a 7-year-old boy named Jacob Tate had drowned near that bridge in October of 1987 after falling from the walkway. Locals would occasionally report hearing cries or seeing shapes under the bridge, but the county had never bothered to investigate because the road was rarely used. As we left, I looked back one last time. The bridge seemed completely normal in the daylight. Ordinary. Lifeless. But I remembered clearly the scraping under my boots, the voice rising straight up through the metal, and the shadow that moved like it belonged to something that had been under that bridge far too long. I haven't crossed it since. The end. The truck that followed me without a driver. I was driving through northern New Mexico along the deserted stretch of U.S. Route 64, between the small towns of Dulce and Tierra Amarilla. It was late August of 2018, a little after 2:15 in the morning. The sky was moonless, the stars hidden behind a thick layer of drifting clouds, and the entire landscape felt hollow and abandoned. I had finished a delivery to Farmington and was headed east toward Taos, hauling an empty flatbed trailer. I was alone that night. My coworker, Mark, usually rode with me, but he had taken the week off, leaving me to cover the long overnight shift by myself. The high desert at night has a way of making you feel like the last living person on Earth. The sagebrush on both sides of the road moved in the wind like dark, twisting shadows. The mountains in the distance were barely silhouettes. The only light for miles came from my own headlights, two pale cones stretching forward into a darkness that seemed endless. I had been driving for almost an hour without seeing a single car. No truckers. No ranchers. No patrols. Just me, the humming of the engine, and the faint whistling of the wind cutting through the cracks of the cabin. Around mile marker 348, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. At first it was just a small, distant reflection. A pale blur. I assumed it was my imagination or maybe a faint glint from the trailer. But a moment later, the blur grew brighter, becoming two perfectly round headlights. They appeared suddenly, out of nowhere, on a stretch of road where I knew for certain nobody had been behind me for miles. I checked again, leaning slightly to get a better angle. The headlights were real, and they were approaching. I sat up straighter, tightening my grip on the wheel. The vehicle behind me seemed old, based on how faint and yellowish the headlights were. The beams flickered slightly, the way older halogen headlights do when the wiring isn't stable. I slowed down a bit, expecting the vehicle to pass me, but it stayed behind at a perfect distance, far enough to avoid tailgating, but close enough that I could feel its presence pressing against my back. A strange unease settled into my stomach. There was no reason for someone to be following me. Not on that road. Not at that hour. And not without trying to pass an empty flatbed moving just under the speed limit. 10 minutes passed. The truck behind me kept the same exact distance. Every time I sped up, it sped up. Every time I slowed down, it slowed down. There was something unnatural about how perfectly it mirrored me. I turned slightly onto a curve and watched the headlights tilt with precision, following every inch of my movement. Finally I decided to let it pass. I eased into the right lane and reduced my speed significantly. The road was dead straight and empty. There was no reason it couldn't overtake me. I glanced into the side mirror. The truck didn't move. It stayed behind me, motionless except for the slight bouncing of the headlights across the uneven pavement. My heartbeat quickened. Then, without warning, the truck surged forward. The headlights grew brighter as the vehicle sped up rapidly and approached my rear bumper. For a second I braced myself, certain it was going to ram me. But instead it stopped again, exactly one truck length behind me. Perfectly measured. Not an inch closer or farther. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. I pressed the accelerator, my engine roaring as I sped forward. The wind howled around the cab as I gained speed, the trailer rattling behind me. For a moment, the road was empty again. No headlights. No glow. Nothing. Then the lights appeared again. Closer than before. The truck was tailing me with impossible precision. I gripped the wheel hard, my pulse thudding in my throat. The road ahead looked endless and empty, but the presence behind me seemed to fill every inch of the space. I slowed down suddenly, planning to force the truck to stop or pass me, but the vehicle behind me matched my slowdown perfectly. I checked my mirrors again, trying to make out the shape of the truck. The headlights were too bright to see the grille or make. But I saw one detail clearly. There was no silhouette. No outline of a driver. No head. No shoulders. No movement behind the glow. Just two headlights floating through the darkness. A chill crawled down my spine. I flicked on my cabin light for a moment to calm myself, hoping the brightness would distract my nerves. When I turned it off again, the headlights behind me were even closer. I could almost feel the heat of them through the rear window. I instinctively tapped the brake pedal, not enough to slow drastically, but enough to warn the follower. The response was immediate. The truck behind me flicked its headlights off. The road plunged into total blackness except for my own beams. My breath caught. My fingers tightened around the wheel until my knuckles hurt. I stared into the mirrors, but there was nothing, no lights, no shape, no movement. Then the headlights snapped back on. But now the truck was directly beside me. I hadn't heard an engine. I hadn't seen it pull forward. I hadn't sensed it approach on my left or right. But there it was, coasting smoothly along the left lane, matching my speed exactly. The old pickup looked warped and washed out in the moonless dark. It was a battered, dull gray early 90s Ford. The body was dented and patched with rust. The windshield was cracked. The hood was slightly bent. But inside, the cabin was empty. There was no driver. No passenger. No movement. The truck drifted closer, inch by inch, until it nearly brushed the side of my flatbed. The metal groaned from the pressure of my tightening grip as I tried to keep straight. I couldn't look away from the truck beside me. The windows were rolled down, and the cabin inside was pitch black, darker than it should have been. A cold blast of air seeped from the open windows, like the cold from a freezer door. As the truck matched my speed, I saw something impossible. The steering wheel was turning on its own. Just a soft, slow turn, as if guided by invisible hands. I swerved violently to the right, heart pounding, forcing my truck toward the shoulder. The phantom pickup jerked forward immediately, racing ahead with unnatural speed, then cut sharply into my lane, as if trying to block me from escaping. I hit my brakes hard. The whole flatbed shuddered. The engine coughed. My trailer fishtailed. For a moment I thought the entire rig would flip. Then the pickup vanished. Not drifted away. Not turned. Not slowed. It was simply gone. The headlights blinked out like someone had unplugged them. The space in front of me emptied in an instant. The road stretched ahead, dark and silent, completely untouched. I didn't stop driving. I didn't look back. Not once. I kept going until the first sign of human life appeared, a small gas station on the outskirts of Taos. The neon lights flickered weakly as I pulled in and staggered out of the cab. Inside, the attendant, a middle-aged man with deep lines in his face, looked at me like he'd seen this before. Without prompting, he said, "You came from Route 64, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed heavily and pointed to an old bulletin board near the counter. Pinned there among faded maps and lost dog posters was a decades-old newspaper clipping. Burned edges. Grainy photo. A charred pickup pulled from a ravine. The headline read, "Local man dies in fiery crash on Route 64. Truck continues rolling for half a mile after driver ejected." The attendant tapped the photo. "They say the truck never stopped moving. Rolled on its own. Some drivers still see it. Tries to run folks off the road the way it went off itself." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what I had seen that night. The end. The female voice on CB radio channel 19. I was driving through southern Missouri on Interstate 44, deep in the Ozarks, a part of the country that can feel unsettlingly empty once midnight hits. It happened in early March of 2021, just after 12:30 a.m. The night was cold, the sky clouded over, and the only light came from distant truck stops that flashed by every 20 or 30 miles. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of produce on my way towards Springfield. My partner, Dale, was supposed to ride with me that night, but his daughter had come down with the flu, so I took the drive alone. Anyone who's driven the Ozarks at night knows how eerie it can get. The forests on both sides of the highway look like solid black walls, and the rolling hills make each stretch of road feel like a tunnel carved through darkness. You get long, dead zones on the radio, and the CB becomes your only company. I kept mine on Channel 19, listening to the usual chatter from other drivers scattered miles apart. Around mile marker 159, the CB crackled softly with static. Nothing unusual, just atmospheric interference. But a few seconds later, the static shifted. It became rhythmic, like someone breathing close to a microphone. I turned the volume up slightly, thinking maybe a driver was trying to make contact through poor reception. Then a voice came through. A woman's voice. Very soft, trembling, barely above a whisper. "Is anybody there?" I froze for a moment. It wasn't the usual tone you hear on CB at night. Most drivers are casual, tired, gruff. This voice sounded fragile. Scared. I pressed the talk button and responded, "Copy that, this is eastbound on 44. You okay, ma'am?" Nothing. Just more static and the faint sound of wind brushing past the microphone. Then the breathing came back. Slow. Uneven. Like someone struggling to stay calm. After a long pause, the voice returned, still trembling. "I'm lost, it's so dark, please, is someone near me?" The hair on the back of my neck lifted. She didn't sound drunk. She didn't sound confused. She sounded terrified. I asked her for her location, repeating the question slowly, twice. The static warped for a few seconds. Then the voice answered. "I'm near the Bent Creek exit, please hurry." My stomach nodded immediately. The Bent Creek exit had been closed since 2009. The entire area had been fenced off after a major landslide destroyed part of the road and 2 nearby homes. Nobody lived out there anymore. The access roads were torn up. There was no reason anyone should be near that exit, especially not at night. I adjusted the CB frequency, thinking maybe someone was pranking the channel. But the voice came through clearer now, as though she had moved closer to her radio. "Is anyone coming? Please, please. I can't find the road." The desperation in her voice was real. Too real. It punched straight through the static. I grabbed my phone to call the highway patrol, but of course, reception was dead in that valley. The hills blocked nearly everything. My only link to her was the CB. I pressed the button again and said, "Ma'am, stay calm. I'm passing that area soon. Can you tell me if you're near a vehicle? Can you see lights anywhere?" Silence at first. Then a shaking exhale. I see lights, but they're moving away, they don't hear me." My pulse quickened. If another truck had passed her, they would have reported it. The area was too dangerous for pedestrians at night. I switched on my high beams and focused on the dark stretch ahead. The forest pressed in thick on both sides. When I finally approached the Bent Creek exit sign, it looked even more abandoned than I remembered. The metal was rusted. The reflective coating was peeling. The entire off-ramp was blocked by concrete barriers and orange barrels bleached pale from years of sun. The CB crackled again. "Please, please don't leave me here." Her voice broke on the last words. I slowed the truck to a crawl and scanned the area. The only sound was the engine, rumbling through the stillness. My headlights washed over the barriers, the collapsed asphalt beyond them, and the overgrown brush creeping around the edges. Nothing moved. Then the voice spoke again, but this time very close, as if she were standing right beside the CB microphone. "I'm right here." My chest tightened unbearably. The voice was no longer faint or distant. It was sharp. Clear. Almost too clear. I forced myself to respond. Where exactly are you? I'm right by the Bent Creek exit now. For a long moment, there was only the low hiss of static. Then, in a whisper so soft it barely registered. I'm behind you. I snapped my eyes to the mirror. The road behind me was empty. Nothing but endless darkness. No headlights. No movement. Not even the shape of a parked car. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Ma'am, I don't see you. Can you describe where you are? Another silence. But this one felt heavier, intentional. When she finally spoke, something in her tone had changed completely. The fear was gone. The trembling was gone. Her voice was calm now. Too calm. You already passed me. My heart pounded in my throat. What do you mean? Where are you? You didn't stop in time. The air in the cab dropped in temperature, a sudden chill that made my breath fog. Her next words came slowly, like each one was being shaped with care. You never stop in time. Then a high, distorted screech ripped through the CB, so loud and sharp that I jerked back and nearly dropped the microphone. The sound wasn't human. It was like metal tearing, or a radio caught between frequencies, climbing into a pitch that made my ears burn. I smacked the power switch. The CB went silent instantly. The highway outside felt impossibly quiet now. The kind of quiet you only hear when something is watching you. I kept driving, hands shaking on the wheel. It took almost 20 minutes before I reached an area where my phone had reception again. I pulled off at a small rest stop and called the highway patrol. I reported the voice, the location, everything I'd heard. The officer on the line went silent for a moment, then said he'd send a unit to check, but his tone told me he wasn't expecting to find anything. The next morning, after daylight broke, I visited the station myself. The officer I spoke to was young, maybe late 20s, and he looked uncomfortable when I brought up the call. He finally admitted something in a low voice. Drivers hear her sometimes. Not often. But enough. He leaned closer. A woman died out there in 2009. Landslide took her car right off the ramp. They didn't find her for 3 days. He swallowed hard and added. She used her CB to call for help. Over and over. But nobody could reach her. The last transmission we have recorded is her saying she saw truck lights passing her, but no one stopped. He hesitated before the final detail. She was found holding the mic. That night, out of habit, I turned my CB to channel 19 again. Static filled the cabin, low and familiar. Nothing unusual. Then, faint and trembling, a voice whispered through the noise. Is anyone there? I turned the CB off. I never used that channel again on Route 44. The end. The gas station that appears only at night. I was driving through eastern Utah on State Route 24, the long desolate stretch that cuts through empty desert between Hanksville and Torrey. It was early November of 2016, a little after 1 a.m. The temperature had dropped fast, and the cold wind coming off the desert made the air feel sharper than usual. I had been hauling construction equipment all day and was finally heading back toward Green River. I was alone in the cab. My coworker, Brandon, had taken another route home hours earlier. The sky above me was a pitch-black dome, no moon, no stars, no clouds. Just darkness pressing down on everything. Route 24 at night feels like a place the world forgot. No houses. No lights. No passing cars. Just dead straight asphalt and desert that stretches forever. Even the radio was silent. No stations. No static. Nothing. I'd been running low on fuel for nearly an hour, watching the gauge dip dangerously close to empty. I knew the next real gas station was at least 40 miles away, maybe more. I told myself I'd make it, but the anxiety kept growing, sinking deeper every time the needle trembled. Around mile marker 96, my headlights lit up a shape on the right side of the road. A small sign. I slowed, leaning forward to read it. The metal was old, faded, and the reflective coating barely caught the light. Clear Creek service. Open all night. I frowned. I knew this road. There was no Clear Creek anything out here. Nothing for miles in either direction. But the sign pointed down a narrow side road I hadn't seen before. The asphalt looked cracked, almost swallowed by the desert sand. Still, the idea of running out of fuel in the middle of nowhere terrified me more than following a road I didn't recognize. I turned onto the narrow lane. The darkness thickened immediately. My headlights struggled to touch more than a few yards ahead. The road dipped slightly, curving between low ridges of rock. After about half a mile, a faint yellow glow shimmered through the dark. My chest loosened with relief when I saw it clearly, a small gas station tucked at the base of the rock formations. An old, single-bay building with a flickering sign. 2 pumps. A dusty parking lot. A soft amber light glowed from inside the windows, warm against the cold desert night. I pulled up next to pump 2. The light above the pump buzzed weakly, but it was working. A man stepped out from the store just as I cut the engine. He looked to be in his late 60s. Thin. Pale. Wearing a faded button-up shirt and old work pants. His face was lined, his hair gray and slicked back neatly. He didn't smile, but he nodded politely. "Evenin'," he said. "Cold one tonight." I nodded back, relieved I wasn't alone. "Didn't think I'd find anything open out here." "We're always open," he said. "Always." He took the nozzle, clicked it into my tank, and stood beside the pump as it rumbled to life. I noticed then how quiet it was. No wind. No insects. No engines besides mine. The desert noise had just vanished. I tried to make small talk. Asked him how long the station had been out here. He didn't answer at first. Just stared past me toward the highway as though watching for something only he could see. Then he said, "A long time." His voice sounded distant, almost hollow, like he was speaking from far away. I cleared my throat and asked, "Not many drivers come through this late, I guess?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." His eyes shifted to me then. Pale blue. Unusually bright in the dim light. Something about them made me uncomfortable. Not threatening. Just empty. When the tank finally clicked full, he removed the nozzle and stepped back without another word. I took out my wallet, but he raised his hand slightly, stopping me. "No need," he said. "You'll pay later." That didn't make sense. "Pay later?" I asked. He nodded once. "Later." Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked back toward the store, disappearing inside. The lights in the windows flickered as he passed through them. I stood there, feeling cold creep into my shoulders. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. But I needed fuel. I needed to get home. So I got back into the truck and started the engine. As I pulled away, I glanced at the store one last time. The man was standing in the window. Perfectly still. Watching me. His face half hidden in shadow, eyes fixed on my truck as I drove off. I turned onto the narrow access road and made for the main highway. The moment my tires touched Route 24, I felt like a weight had lifted off my chest. The desert noise returned. The wind picked up. It felt like the world had suddenly come back alive. I checked my mirrors. The road behind me was empty. Pitch black. The side road I had come from was gone. No sign. No turnoff. No lights. Confusion washed over me. I slowed, searching for the access road, telling myself I had simply missed it in the dark. But there was nothing. Just smooth asphalt stretching endlessly through the desert. I drove another 5 miles before I saw headlights behind me, bright, fast-moving headlights. A patrol vehicle. When it caught up, the trooper signaled for me to pull over. My heart raced. I wasn't speeding. I'd done nothing wrong. I stopped on the shoulder and rolled down the window as the trooper approached. He was a large man with a flashlight and a serious expression. "Everything okay tonight?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I just fueled up at Clear Creek service." "Not sure why you stopped me." His expression changed instantly. "Where?" he asked sharply. "Clear Creek service," I repeated. "Old station off a side road near mile marker 96. The trooper's face drained of color. "There's no gas station out there," he said. "Hasn't been one for decades." I insisted. Told him what it looked like. Told him about the man. Even described the pumps. The trooper shook his head slowly, eyes narrowing in disbelief. "That place burned down in 1994, he said quietly. "Electrical fire. Owner died inside. They cleared the remains years ago. Nothing's left." My chest tightened. "No. I was just there. 20 minutes ago." The trooper stared at me, then shined his light across the side of my truck. His beam paused near the back fender. He stepped closer, kneeling slightly to inspect it. "Sir," he said, "do you know what your fuel looks like it came from?" I blinked. "What?" He pointed at a faint line running down the metal. "A residue. Old, yellowed, thin. Like fuel that had evaporated long ago. Not fresh. This is leaded gasoline," he said. "This hasn't been sold anywhere in Utah since the 80s. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I filled up in front of you," I said. I watched him pump it. The trooper stood up slowly. "Who pumped it?" "The man at the station," I said. "The owner." The trooper stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "The owner died trapped behind the counter. They never pulled his body out intact." The desert wind gusted suddenly, rattling the side of the trailer. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I looked at the fuel gauge. It had been full when I left the station. Now it showed almost empty. The trooper stepped back, his expression unreadable. "If I were you," he said quietly, "I wouldn't go looking for that road again. Whatever you saw wasn't a place that's supposed to be here anymore." He let me go after that. For the rest of the night, I drove with the CB off, the radio off, everything silent. When I reached the next rail gas station at dawn, my tank was nearly bone dry, far too empty for the few miles I'd driven since filling up. Inside the convenience store, I waited behind another customer while the clerk rang up his items. When it was my turn, the clerk glanced at me, paused for a moment, and frowned. "Sir," he said slowly, "did you spill something? You smell like old gasoline. Really old." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. All I knew was that in the middle of the Utah desert, on a highway where nothing should exist at night, I had found a gas station that wasn't supposed to be there. And a man still working inside who had died 22 years earlier. The end. The woman standing on the median of Old Route 66. I was driving through northern Arizona on the abandoned section of Old Route 66 between Seligman and Ash Fork, the stretch that most travelers don't even know still exists. It was late September of 2018, around 12:45 a.m. The sky was clear, but the moon was hidden behind drifting clouds, leaving long empty miles washed in faint silver light. I had taken a wrong exit earlier near Kingman and ended up following the old highway instead of the main interstate. The GPS kept recalculating but offered nothing useful, so I decided to keep going until I found a way back to I-40. I was alone in the cab. The radio was off because reception had died 30 minutes earlier. The desert on both sides of the road was nothing but black rock, sagebrush, and a cold wind that made the ground tremble. There were no other cars. No houses. Nothing but the cracked asphalt threading through the night. That was when I first saw her. She stood perfectly still on the raised median separating the eastbound and westbound lanes. A lone figure, illuminated only by my headlights as I approached. At first, she looked like a silhouette, a woman in a long white dress fluttering slightly in the wind. Her head was tilted downward, and her arms hung at her sides. She wasn't moving. Not even shifting her weight. She looked like a statue someone had placed in the middle of the highway. I slowed my speed instinctively, leaning forward. Something about the way she stood made my chest tighten. She didn't seem lost. She didn't seem injured. She looked like she was waiting for something. Or someone. As I crept closer, I realized a few details that made my heart start to hammer. Her dress wasn't clean white. It was pale but stained around the bottom, as if soaked through long ago. Her hair hung straight down her back, unmoving even in the wind. There were no bags. No car. No sign of anyone else around. Just her. I rolled down the window an inch, planning to call out. Instead, the cold desert air blasted into the cabin with such force it made my eyes sting. The wind carried an odd scent, dry, metallic, almost like old rusted steel. I slowed even more, now barely going 10 miles per hour. As my truck neared her, her head lifted. Not quickly. Not naturally. But slowly, with a stiffness that made my stomach drop. Her face came into view. Pale. Thin. Hollow under the eyes. She looked young, maybe late 20s, but her expression was lifeless. Her dark eyes glinted in the headlights, reflective like glass, fixed directly on me as if she had been waiting for me specifically. I braked hard. She didn't react to the noise. Didn't blink. Didn't step back. She simply stared at me, expression flat, as if she were studying something she had seen before. I swallowed hard and called out through the cracked window, "Ma'am? Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't answer. The silence on the highway grew so heavy it felt physical. The wind that had been howling suddenly stopped completely. Even the slight movement of her dress ceased. Then, very slowly, she lifted her right arm. It rose stiffly until she was pointing directly toward the shoulder on my left side. Not waving. Not beckoning. Just pointing. My heart pounded harder. I glanced toward the shoulder, half expecting to see a broken-down car or another person. But the shoulder was empty. Nothing but rocks and darkness. When I looked back at her, her arm was still raised, fingers still pointing, gaze never shifting. "Do you need me to stop?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. Still no response. I felt a sudden wave of unease, strong enough to make my hands shake. Something inside me knew I shouldn't get out of the truck. Everything in me screamed that stepping out would be a mistake I couldn't take back. I shifted into drive, planning to inch past her. That was when she dropped her arm sharply and stepped backward. Without bending her knees. Her body moved in one piece, gliding back a few inches like she was being pulled by a rope tied to her waist. A cold shiver crawled across my spine. Her eyes widened just slightly, the first real change in expression, and for a split second I could have sworn her pupils seemed wrong, too large, swallowing the dark around them. I pressed the gas. As I passed her, I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, refusing to look directly at her again. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw her body twist slightly, turning to face the truck as it moved past. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. I didn't exhale until I was several yards past her. But something made me glance into the rearview mirror. I wish I hadn't. She was standing directly behind my truck. Not on the median anymore. Not where I had left her. But standing centered in the lane behind me, facing the truck, hands at her sides, head tilted downward again. She hadn't walked there. She hadn't run. She had simply reappeared. My breath stopped in my chest. I sped up, forcing myself not to look back again. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark, but my mind kept insisting that if I slowed down, even for a moment, she would be closer. 15 minutes passed in agonizing silence. When I finally reached a small gas station outside Ash Fork, I pulled in and sat frozen in the driver's seat for nearly a minute before climbing out. Inside the store, 2 locals were drinking coffee. One looked at me and said, "You look like you saw a ghost out there." I asked him, voice still shaking, "Do you know anything about a woman in white standing on the median on Old Route 66? Both men went quiet immediately. The older one leaned forward. "Where exactly?" About 6 miles west of town, I said. His expression changed entirely. He lowered his voice. She's been seen since the 70s. People say she lost her family in a car accident on that stretch. Her husband fell asleep at the wheel. Car rolled over the median. Killed their daughter instantly. Husband died later. She survived long enough to crawl out. They found her standing on the median, pointing at the wreck, like she was trying to show someone where they were. A cold sweat broke across my back. She died before help arrived, he continued. People say she still waits there, pointing at the spot where her family died. She never speaks. Never moves until you're close. I felt dizzy. Does she follow people? Both men exchanged a slow look. The older one said, "Not everyone. Only the ones who don't stop." I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. And every time I drive that stretch now, even in daylight, I keep my eyes straight ahead and never look toward the median. Because I know she's still standing there. Waiting for someone to notice what she's trying to show. The end. Unexplainable true stories from houses with no history. I was driving through rural Tennessee, deep in the hills outside Cookeville, on an assignment for my contracting job. It was late November of 2019, around 10:20 p.m., and I was heading back toward the highway after finishing a long inspection at a storage facility. The night was moonless, the air damp, and the fog was drifting low across the ground like white smoke. My coworker, Jace, had followed me earlier in his own truck but turned off toward his house around 8 p.m., leaving me alone on the narrow county roads. These roads weren't marked on most digital maps. They twisted through thick forests, old farmland, and clusters of forgotten wooden homes. The kind of houses that look abandoned even when they aren't. The kind that make the night feel heavier than it should. Just before I reached an intersection marked only by a leaning stop sign, my GPS suddenly lost signal. The screen froze, then went blank. I slowed down, scanning the darkness for landmarks, but the fog swallowed everything more than 20 feet away. I took the right turn, hoping it led towards State Route 70. After driving for about a mile, my headlights caught something ahead. A house. A small, one-story farmhouse with peeling white paint, set about 30 yards off the road. A single porch light glowed weakly against the fog. The house looked old but intact. No broken windows. No boarded doors. A gravel driveway led up to the porch. But here was the strange part. I had driven this exact stretch of road earlier that day, and there had been no house. No driveway. No mailbox. Nothing but empty field. I slowed down, trying to convince myself I had misremembered. Maybe I'd been too focused on my phone earlier. Maybe I had passed it without noticing. But something in my gut tightened. The house looked too clean in some ways, too sharp in the headlights. Like it hadn't aged naturally. As I crept forward, I noticed movement on the porch. A figure stepped into view. A child. A boy no older than 10, standing beneath the porch light, looking straight at my truck. His clothes looked outdated, brown trousers, a white shirt, suspenders. He wasn't shivering despite the cold. His face was blank, emotionless. He lifted his hand slowly. And he waved. Not frantically. Not for help. Just one slow, steady wave. I felt a cold ripple through my chest. I rolled down the window halfway and called out, "You okay? Is your family home?" The boy didn't respond. He lowered his hand and turned slightly, as if listening to something inside the house. Then he looked back at me, head tilted just a little too far, like he was studying me closely. I cleared my throat. "Do you need help?" Again, no answer. But he raised his hand again and pointed, straight at me. I felt my stomach drop. Before I could say anything else, the porch light flickered. Once. Twice. Then went completely out. The boy vanished into the darkness. I scanned the porch with my flashlight, but the beam caught only peeling boards and a broken rocking chair. The boy was gone. No footsteps. No movement. I should have driven away. Everything in me told me to leave. But something about the house pulled at my attention. It felt wrong to leave a child alone in a place like this. I turned into the gravel driveway, heart pounding. The tires crunched quietly as I approached the porch. When I stepped out of the truck, the air felt colder than before. Not just cold, dead. Silent. Even the insects had gone quiet. I climbed the steps slowly, each board creaking under my weight. I knocked on the front door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. The door creaked open on its own. A faint musty smell drifted out. Old wood. Damp fabric. Dust. And something else, an unnerving emptiness, as if the house hadn't been lived in for decades. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed strangely inside, bouncing off the walls like the house was larger than it appeared. I stepped inside. The interior looked abandoned. Furniture covered in dust. Curtains stiff with age. A fireplace filled with gray ash that looked untouched for years. No footprints. No signs of life. But on a small table near the front window, I noticed something strange. A photograph. Black and white. Faded. A family standing in front of the same house. Mother. Father. 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy looked exactly like the child I had seen on the porch. But the photograph was dated. 1954. I felt the breath catch in my throat. Suddenly, somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard creaked. Not from my weight. From someone walking. Slow. Heavy. Measured steps. I turned toward the hallway, raising my flashlight. The beam reached only a few yards. Darkness swallowed the rest. The steps grew louder, closer, as if someone was approaching, but I saw nothing in the light. "Hello?" I called out again, voice cracking. The steps stopped. Silence. Then, from the darkness, a soft whisper drifted out. "Don't stay here." My hands started to shake. The whisper was faint, but it was definitely the same boy's voice. I stepped backward toward the door. The flashlight beam trembled. Something moved at the far end of the hall, a shape shifting, sliding along the wall. Too tall to be the child. Too thin to be a normal adult. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor. Then the porch light snapped back on outside. I bolted. I ran through the doorway, down the steps, and into the cold night air. I didn't look back, not even once. As I climbed into the truck and slammed the door shut, I saw the boy again. Standing at the edge of the yard. Half in the light, half hidden in shadow. He wasn't waving this time. He was staring directly at me, expression unchanged. I floored the gas. Gravel shot out behind me as I sped back toward the main road. My chest felt tight, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the wheel. After a quarter mile, I finally calmed enough to glance in the rearview mirror. My heart stopped. The house was gone. The driveway was gone. The porch light was gone. Nothing remained but empty fields stretching into the dark, a flat, open expanse with no buildings, no lights, no signs of anything man-made. I didn't slow down until I reached the first populated area near Baxter. I parked at a gas station and sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes, trying to understand what I had seen. When I finally went inside, the clerk noticed the look on my face and asked what had happened. I told him everything. His expression changed slowly, his eyes narrowing. He asked where exactly I had seen the house. When I described the location, he nodded grimly. "That property burned down in the 60s, he said. "Whole family died inside. Folks around here say you can drive past that field 10 times and never see anything. But sometimes, when the fog's low enough, the house shows up again." I swallowed hard. "And the boy?" The clerk hesitated. "They say he tries to warn people. House burned so fast he never made it out the door." People claim he points at the ones who shouldn't stay inside. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Because I knew exactly who he had been pointing at. The end. The crying man in the middle of the highway. I was driving through western Kansas on a desolate stretch of US 283, between Ness City and Waukene. It was late December of 2020, just after 2 a.m. Snow wasn't falling yet, but the wind coming off the plains made the air feel like ice. The sky was clouded over, the moon hidden, and the darkness seemed thicker than usual, so thick that my headlights looked weak against the empty road ahead. I'd been on the highway for nearly an hour without seeing another vehicle. My partner, Luis, had taken the day route earlier, so I was alone with nothing but the low hum of the engine and the occasional whistle of wind slicing across the cab. That stretch of road is nothing but open fields, broken fences, and abandoned barns leaning sideways in the dark. The land is so flat that sound carries strangely far, and on nights like that, the silence feels as heavy as a weight pressing against your chest. I was hauling a light trailer, meaning the truck didn't fight the wind much, but the emptiness around me felt wrong. Like there was something in the dark just outside the reach of the headlights, following silently. Around mile marker 106, I saw something ahead. A shape sitting in the middle of the highway. I squinted and eased off the accelerator. At first, I thought it was debris, maybe part of a blown tire or some fallen cargo. But as I approached, the shape became clearer. A man. Sitting cross-legged on the road. Head bowed. Shoulders shaking. He was crying. A chill crawled across my skin. I slowed to nearly a stop, pulling to the right so my headlights shone fully on him. He didn't react. Didn't turn. Didn't lift his head. He just sat there, hands covering his face, his body trembling violently like he was sobbing uncontrollably. I rolled down the window an inch. "Sir?" I called out. "Are you hurt?" No answer. His crying grew louder, echoing unnaturally across the empty highway. It wasn't just sadness, it sounded like suffering. Raw. Broken. The kind of sound that makes the air itself feel colder. I put the truck in park and turned on the hazard lights. Against every instinct screaming in my mind, I stepped out into the freezing wind. The air smelled sharp, metallic, and bitter. The man didn't move as I approached. He wore a dark jacket, torn at the shoulder, and his jeans were covered in dirt. His boots were old, falling apart at the seams. He looked like he had been walking for miles. I stopped a few feet away. "Sir, can you hear me?" The crying stopped instantly. His hands lowered very slowly. And when he lifted his face toward me, my heart slammed against my ribs. His skin was burned black across the entire front of his face, thickened, melted, uneven, like it had been exposed to intense heat. His eyes were nothing but dark glossy pits, reflecting the headlights like glass. No whites. No pupils. Just empty, gleaming darkness. The exposed skin around his mouth had cracked open, revealing teeth blackened at the edges. He stared at me. Not blinking. Not breathing. Just staring. I stumbled backward, almost slipping on the cold asphalt. The man stood up. But the movement wasn't natural. His limbs lifted stiffly, as if they had forgotten how to bend. His neck tilted at an angle far too sharp to be comfortable, and his burned face fixed itself directly onto mine. Then he spoke. "You didn't stop." His voice was hoarse, mangled, the words distorted like they were tearing through damaged vocal cords. The wind carried his breathless whisper across the empty stretch of road, making it sound louder than it should have. "I tried," he rasped. "But you didn't." Every part of my body screamed to run. I backed toward the truck, my hands shaking so violently I could barely feel the cold. The man took a step toward me, one slow, dragging step. His boots scraped the asphalt with a sound like sandpaper on metal. "You didn't stop," he repeated, voice cracking into a low, broken sob. "No one, ever, stops." I bolted for the cab. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and floored the accelerator so hard the tires squealed. The truck lurched forward, my heart hammering in my throat. I didn't look back. But I heard something. A sound no human could make. A raw, distorted scream that rose in pitch until it sounded like metal tearing. I drove faster. The hazard lights blinked wildly behind me. My hands were ice on the wheel. The scream faded only when I passed the next set of reflective markers nearly a mile away. After 10 minutes, when I finally dared to look in the mirror, my blood froze. The man was standing in the middle of the lane behind me. Perfectly still. Facing me. Impossible. There was no way he could have followed me. But his silhouette was unmistakable in the reflection of the hazard lights, the burned face, the stiff posture, the gnarled, unnatural angle of his head. I didn't slow down. I didn't blink. I kept driving until the lights of Wakini appeared in the distance. When I reached a 24-hour gas station, I practically stumbled inside. The attendant, a middle-aged man with heavy eyelids, looked at me like I'd just escaped something deadly. He asked if I was okay. I ignored the question and blurted out exactly what I'd seen. The attendant's expression darkened. "You saw him near 106, he asked quietly. I nodded. He exhaled slowly. "You're not the first. Won't be the last." I swallowed hard. "Who is he?" The attendant leaned closer, voice low. 20 years ago, there was a bad wreck out there. Truck caught fire. Driver trapped inside. People drove past thinking it was debris on the road. No one stopped. By the time someone called it in, it was too late. My stomach twisted painfully. "They say his spirit stays there," the attendant continued. "Crying. Begging. Waiting for someone to help him. But if you get too close, he shows you what he looked like when he burned." I felt lightheaded. The attendant added one final detail in a whisper. "And the ones he stands behind on the highway? Those are the drivers who looked away that night." My pulse thudded in my ears violently. Because I knew I had looked away. I had tried to avoid him at first. I hadn't stopped in time. I left the station as quickly as I could and drove the rest of the night with every light in the cab on. And even now, when I think about that stretch of US 283, all I picture is his burned face lifting into my headlights, and the way he whispered the same words over and over. "You didn't stop." The end. The phantom car that tries to run you off the road. I was driving through southern Alabama on Highway 331, the long two-lane stretch that cuts between Opp and Florala. It was mid-January of 2021, a little after 1:30 a.m. The air was cold, the sky moonless, and the pine trees lining both sides of the highway looked like towering black walls. I had finished a late delivery run in Montgomery and was heading toward the Florida border to stay overnight at a cheap motel I used whenever I passed through the area. I was alone that night. My coworker, Trent, had taken a different route home hours earlier. Highway 331 at night feels like a tunnel through the woods. The road curves unpredictably, and cell reception cuts in and out without warning. The radio becomes nothing but faint static, and the darkness is so deep you feel like the world beyond your headlights doesn't exist at all. I'd been driving for nearly 30 minutes without seeing another set of headlights. No trucks. No sedans. Not even a pair of taillights miles ahead. Just endless asphalt and total blackness. Around mile marker 42, I noticed something strange behind me. Two bright headlights suddenly flared to life far down the road. They hadn't approached gradually. They hadn't grown brighter over time like any normal vehicle. One moment the road was empty. The next moment, the lights were just there, far away but unmistakably clear. I kept glancing at the mirror, uneasy. Something about the headlights felt off. They were bright. Too bright. White with a blue tint, like high-end aftermarket bulbs. But the beam looked wrong. Instead of spreading outward toward the shoulders, both beams were narrow, almost perfectly straight. I slowed down slightly. The headlights behind me stayed exactly where they were. I pressed the accelerator again. The headlights moved forward instantly, closing the distance with unnatural speed. My pulse quickened. No engine sound reached me. No rumble across the pavement. Just the growing glare of the lights behind me. Within seconds, the car was right on my tail, less than a car length away. I could feel the tension in my arms as I gripped the wheel tighter. I flicked my hazard lights twice, the universal trucker signal telling the driver to back off. The car didn't move. It stayed glued to my rear bumper. The beams were so bright that the inside of my cab glowed faint white, shadows stretching unnaturally across the dashboard. I couldn't see the grille of the car. I couldn't see the hood. I couldn't even see a silhouette behind the windshield. It was like the headlights were floating on their own. I rolled my window down an inch, expecting to hear the roar of an engine or the sound of tires. But there was nothing. Just cold, dead silence. My stomach twisted. I changed lanes slowly, just enough to give the car space to pass on the left. It didn't take the opportunity. Instead, it matched my movement exactly. When I drifted right, it drifted right. When I centered myself, it centered itself. It moved with me like it was tethered to my trailer by an invisible rope. A cold shiver crawled along my spine. I sped up. The truck roared as I pushed it harder than I usually would on a night route. The headlights behind me kept pace effortlessly. Not falling behind. Not struggling. Just gliding forward, perfectly balanced. Then, without warning, the headlights blinked out. The road behind me fell into absolute darkness. I stared into the mirror, heart pounding, waiting for the lights to reappear. 5 seconds passed. 10. 15. Nothing. Then the headlights snapped back on, right beside me. I jerked the wheel instinctively. The truck swerved toward the shoulder, the trailer rattling violently. I forced it back onto the road, vision shaking from adrenaline. The phantom car was now in the left lane, gliding perfectly alongside me. But the sight of it made my blood run cold. It was an old black sedan. Early 2000s. The kind with rounded edges and a long hood. But the paint was faded, almost charcoal gray, with large patches of rust eating through the metal. The windows were tinted pitch black, too dark to see anything inside. The body was dented in places, as if it had been struck repeatedly by something heavy. The front bumper was cracked and hanging unevenly. But the worst part was the front end. Burnt. Melted. The metal around the headlights was warped and blackened, as if the car had been in a serious fire. The left headlight housing was half melted, plastic sagging downward like wax. The hood was warped upward, exposing part of the engine compartment. Yet it moved as if nothing was wrong. Smooth. Controlled. Silent. No engine noise. No tire grip. No vibration. I stared, frozen, as the sedan drifted closer, its damaged bumper nearly touching my door. I shouted instinctively, "No! Get back!" The sedan responded. It swerved sharply, slamming its side into my trailer with impossible force. The impact jolted the entire rig, sending vibrations up through the steering wheel. But what terrified me most wasn't the hit, it was the sound. There was none. No metal crunch. No scraping. No shattering. Just the silent push of something that shouldn't exist. I floored the gas pedal. The engine roared violently, the truck surging forward. The sedan, however, matched my speed instantly, gliding forward like it weighed nothing. Like physics didn't apply to it. Then, as the road curved slightly, the sedan drifted into my lane. It tried to push me off the highway. I fought the wheel with everything I had, my arms shaking, my breath coming in choked gasps. The right shoulder dropped into a steep ditch filled with tall dead grass and weeds. If the truck went off, the trailer would flip, and I'd be crushed under 40,000 pounds of steel. "Come on," I whispered to myself. "Stay on the road." The sedan pressed harder. The trailer wobbled. For a moment, I felt the entire rig sliding. Then I saw an opening. I slammed the brakes and jerked my wheel left. The truck skidded violently, the trailer fishtailing for a split second. The sedan glided forward, overshooting me, then drifted back into its lane. For the first time, I saw the driver's side window clearly. There was no one inside. No face. No hands on the wheel. No silhouette. Just absolute darkness. Then the sedan accelerated, faster than any engine could possibly push it, shooting ahead with a burst of unnatural speed. It drove directly into a curve in the road. But instead of turning, it went straight, through the guardrail. The rail bent impossibly easily, as if it were paper. The sedan plunged into the thick pines beyond, headlights flickering once before disappearing entirely among the trees. I pulled onto the shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. My breathing wouldn't steady. I sat there for almost 10 minutes before forcing myself to drive to the nearest gas station near Florala. Inside, the overnight clerk, a wiry man with deep-set eyes, looked at me and frowned. "You all right? You look like death." I told him everything. Every detail. His expression changed slowly as I spoke. Then he nodded. "You're not crazy," he said quietly. "People round here talk about that car." I swallowed hard. "What is it?" He leaned on the counter. 15 years ago, there was a nasty wreck on 331. Black sedan hit a tanker, both went up. Driver burned alive inside. Fire was so hot the car melted into the asphalt. They had to dig it out with equipment." He paused, voice dropping lower. "The ghost at the desert rest stop. I was driving through Southern California on the long, empty stretch of Interstate 15 between Barstow and Baker. It was mid-August of 2017, around 2:10 a.m. The desert was still blisteringly hot even at that hour, the air so dry it felt like it scraped your lungs every time you inhaled. I had been hauling equipment from Los Angeles to Las Vegas and was hours behind schedule after a loading delay. My partner Victor had taken the night off, so I was alone with nothing but the distant glow of the interstate and the vast black desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The Mojave at night is a strange, unsettling place. The horizon disappears. The stars look too close. And the silence is so absolute it almost hums. The highway cuts through miles and miles of dead land, no houses, no towns, no noise except the rumble of your own engine. I'd been driving for nearly an hour without seeing another vehicle. The darkness felt like a living thing pressing against my windows. My water jug was completely empty. I'd miscalculated earlier and finished the last of it before I hit the desert stretch. My throat was painfully dry, my hands starting to tremble slightly from dehydration. When I finally saw the small green sign ahead, Desert Vista Rest Stop, 1 mile, I felt relieved enough that the tension in my shoulders eased a little. I pulled in about 2 minutes later, turning into the cracked asphalt lot. The rest stop was tiny. Just a single restroom building, 2 dim streetlights, a cracked map board, and empty picnic tables half buried in sand. There were no other cars. No trucks. The only sound was the steady hum of the vending machine by the bathroom wall and the faint rustling of wind sweeping across the dunes. As I parked, my headlights swept across a figure standing near one of the concrete benches. A man. Alone. He stood in the center of the rest stop as if he had been waiting there for hours. He wore old-fashioned clothing, dark trousers, a thin long-sleeved shirt, suspenders. His posture was rigid, shoulders slightly hunched, arms hanging loosely at his sides. His skin looked unnaturally pale in the bluish glow of the streetlight. And even from my truck, I could tell something was off about him. He didn't move. Not even when my door opened. I stepped out cautiously, my boots crunching against the sand-covered pavement. The heat hit me immediately, thick and suffocating. As I approached, the man turned his head slightly, too slowly, like his neck resisted the movement. In the pale glow, I finally saw his face clearly. He looked exhausted. Eyes sunken. Lips cracked. Skin dry and grayish, like someone who'd been walking in the desert for far too long. He spoke before I reached him. "Do you have water?" His voice was barely more than a dry whisper, strained and brittle, like it hurt him to speak. I stopped a safe distance away. Something about his presence filled me with a cold dread that didn't match the heat of the night. I ran out, I said. That's why I stopped here. There's a vending machine, maybe it still works. He stared at me silently for a moment, as if processing the words too slowly. His eyes didn't blink. Not once. Then he said, please. I turned toward the vending machine and walked over, digging for cash. The machine hummed softly, its lights flickering. When I pressed the button for bottled water, the machine clunked loudly, rattled, and dropped a lukewarm bottle into the slot. I grabbed it and turned around. The man was standing much closer now. Only a few feet away from me. I hadn't heard him walk. Hadn't heard the sand shift. He was simply there. He stared at the bottle, not at me, and reached out his hand. His fingers shook as they extended toward the water. I hesitated a moment before handing it over. The bottle passed through his hand. Not fell. Not dropped. Passed through him, like it had gone through smoke. I froze. The bottle hit the pavement and rolled to a stop. The man didn't react. His hand remained suspended in the air, trembling slightly. When he finally lifted his face toward mine, something in my chest seized. His eyes were dead. Not emotionless, dead. Clouded, milky, unfocused. His lips parted again, cracking further at the corners. You didn't stop, he whispered. No one stopped. A cold wave ran down my spine, chilling me despite the desert heat. I'm sorry, I stammered. I don't understand. He took a small step toward me, his feet dragging across the concrete with a slow scraping sound. I walked, until I couldn't walk anymore, he whispered. They drove past. All of them. I waved, but no one stopped. The air felt heavy, suffocating. I backed away slowly, unable to tear my eyes from his pale, hollow face. There was heat, he said. So much heat. I tried to find water. Tried to find shade. Tried to find someone. His voice deteriorated with every word, growing drier, more brittle, as if his throat had turned to sand. The wind picked up suddenly, sweeping dust across the pavement. When the gust passed, he was gone. Vanished. No footsteps. No movement. Nothing. Just the abandoned rest stop, the vending machine humming quietly, and the sound of my own rapid breathing echoing in my ears. I stumbled backward, searching wildly for any sign of him. My heart hammered as I circled around the restroom building, shining my phone's flashlight into the darkness. There was no trace of him. Then something caught my eye near the edge of the asphalt. A small, weathered wooden cross, half buried in sand. I approached slowly, pulse racing. The cross had a cracked metal plate nailed to the center. I brushed off the sand covering it, revealing a faded inscription. Matthew Hale. Found here. August 1994. My stomach dropped. He had died here. Walking through the desert. Dehydration. Heat stroke. Alone. Abandoned. I turned to run back to my truck, but a voice whispered behind me, so close it felt like someone was leaning over my shoulder. Please, don't leave me. I spun around. The man stood inches from me, face twisted not with anger, but with desperation. His skin was cracked, peeling, his lips chalk white and open as if gasping for air. His eyes stared through me. Begging. Pleading. Something broke inside me. I ran. I sprinted across the lot and practically dove into the truck. My hands shook violently as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. In the rearview mirror, the man stood in the center of the rest stop. Watching. His figure blurred with the heat waves rising off the asphalt, fading and reappearing with the flickering streetlights. As I sped onto the highway, the rest stop grew smaller in the mirror, until the lights blinked out completely, as if the place had never existed. 2 days later, after delivering my load in Las Vegas, I stopped at a trucker's diner outside of town. I mentioned the rest stop encounter to a small group of drivers sitting at the counter. The oldest among them, an 80-year-old man with a weathered face, put down his fork and stared at me. "You saw him," he said quietly. I swallowed hard. "Matthew Hale?" The old man nodded. "He got lost out there in '94. Car broke down. Tried to walk to the next stop. Heat killed him before morning. Folks passed him on the road but didn't stop. He'd been waving. Asking for water." My throat tightened painfully.